Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependency podcast. Today, I'm sitting with Kayla Nettleton. Kayla is a licensed clinical social worker based in Texas. She loves working with overwhelmed and stressed out women looking to find balance in their life. She also enjoys working with couples looking to get out of a rut. Some of Kayla's favorite things include spending time with family and friends, traveling, and listening to inspiring podcasts. Kayla, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
All right, let's start with the typical two. I'm curious, Kayla, how do you define codependency?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I really had to stop myself from going through your podcasts and hearing everybody else's definitions of codependency. So in my car ride after dropping off the kids, it really came to me. So my definition of codependency is always wanting or willing to give, but never or rarely willing to receive.
Tell us more about that.
In my work, I think the definition of codependency, if it comes up, sometimes people aren't, I guess, willing to accept the definition that we normally hear of codependency, because not everyone is aware that they're trying to maybe help others or be more of like a hero. They're not trying to be a hero, but a lot of it is stemmed from how we're raised. I'm Hispanic, and in the way I grew up in the Hispanic culture, we're taught to always do things for our family no matter what. You're always, always be willing to help out your family. But it wasn't really talked about in terms of being able to receive the help if needed. So yes, you should always be willing to help, but no, you should never go and ask for it. And this also, thinking about like my own experience with this definition that I created, I was thinking a lot about my friendships and how I've always wanted my friends to come to me if they ever needed anything, but rarely would I go to my own friends. If I was like in a real bind, I would just look to myself to figure out how to get out of that bind, because I never wanted to bother people. Yet here I was expecting my own friends to do what I wasn't willing to do.
Right.
That's a long-winded way of describing this definition.
Yeah, I sense this whole podcast is about long wind. Can you share more about codependent experiences, either with friends or other relationships in your life?
Yeah. Let's see. So just in my friendships, I've never, I guess, opened up as much as I wanted other people to open up. And I think I always struggled really going deeper with my friends and letting them in, because I didn't want to be, or I thought that maybe I would be too much, or I didn't want to burden them. So I would never really talk about, I guess, real things. Recently, it's been 2 years. It's still recent. My dad passed away in 2021. And even that, I don't really talk about it much. I also have 3 close friends who've also lost family. Some of them have lost both parents. Some of them have lost one parent at different stages in their life. And I've connected with them and able to go deep with them. But other people, it's like, I would rather not, what goes through my mind is I would rather not burden them. And so that's like these codependent tendencies, coming up for me.
Right.
I'm okay with people. I'm always willing to be there for other people, but not always willing to allow people to be there for me.
Right. And I'm curious, Kayla, if you can articulate what you've experienced as the short-term or long-term impact of that in a friendship.
I guess the long-term impact is that I don't really create very close friendships. I do have some amazing friends that I'm creating now because I'm kind of working past these things.
Right.
But I've lost friends who who were really good friends for a while, and because I never opened up myself, I lost them over the years. Because I would never turn to them. I would check in on them, but then I wouldn't ever go to them for anything other than to check in, see how they're doing. And I would respond, "Oh, I'm doing great. I'm fine. Things are awesome," when they weren't always.
Other thoughts on the impact internally, right? So as you're speaking, Kayla, words like, typically with codependent, right, this imbalance in relationships, we suggest that the giver, I don't know, yeah, I guess you're giving a lot in these relationships, or like listening, not necessarily sharing, tends to build up anger, resentment, a desire for others to mind read, like, oh, like, why aren't they asking about me? That's the typical, that's what we have heard. And yet I'm curious, like, in your experience, like, is that a part of your friendships? Is it? And if not, or if so, like, how come?
It's not a part of my friendships now, but in the past it has been. Because since I would check in on these people, I would in turn become upset if they never contacted me, like if they were in town. I would get a little bit defensive, like, oh, why didn't they tell me they were in town? Like, I always make myself available. And it was actually my husband who pointed this out. He was like, why do you go out of your way if they're not doing the same thing? I was like, well, I don't know. I guess because I want to see them. So I had to really, if I wanted to keep the friendship, I had to acknowledge that whatever I'm giving, I can't expect them to give back if I wanted that friendship. I had to accept the responsibility that I created what I created. And let me see. I might have to re-answer that question.
How come?
Can you ask that again?
Well, I sense it's right. What I'm hearing is this pattern in your friendships where I check in, I listen, and I withhold, omit, um, uh, neglect to share about how I'm doing because I don't want to, right? I'm worried that it'll burden you, it'll be too much. And this is my role. I am the listener. I and yet part of that pattern is I check in, I listen. Why aren't you checking in? Why aren't you listening? I'm not going to share, but it'd be nice from time to time if you check in or if you ask. I don't know what comes up as I try and summarize that.
It's funny because that's like, why would they check in if I never gave them like a real answer other than I'm fine, everything's good? So of course they would come to this assumption, like I had been coming to an assumption. They would likely come up with the assumption that I'm doing good, and if I wasn't, maybe I would bring it up myself. But I was on the other side assuming I don't want to burden them, that I would maybe be burdening them with whatever it was that I was going through or dealing with at the time. But that doesn't allow them to have the opportunity to make that decision for themselves.
Right.
I had a friend reach out, and she was going through a tough time. This was actually earlier this week. And she asked if she could call. I'm like, yeah, sure, call me. I'm not doing anything right now. And then she called, was asking like what was going on. And she had stopped and was like, I just don't want to like just dump on you. And I said, okay, well, I'm clear the rest of the day. I don't have anything going on. So you are free to do that. And then she like was telling me her story. So this was, her like being a responsive friend, and not just word vomiting, right? Everything that was going on without me being able to make the decision of whether or not I could handle whatever it was she was going through. And that was really nice of her to do, but she also gave me the choice to say, no, I can't do that right now. And that we should give everyone the opportunity before we just, maybe not everyone, but the people we trust, our friends who we trust, we should be able to give them that opportunity and make that decision for themselves, because it's their decision, not ours.
Right. So 2 thoughts stand out. First, right, I think part of your definition of codependency is not letting others make decisions, right? You said that. Yeah, I'll make decisions for them. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'll make decisions for them. Yeah, because I used to always make this decision for them without, and I still struggle with that with my friends. Being able to really let them in and know like what's going on with whatever I'm going through in my life. I do have, my own boundary and not really discussing my relationship because that's between my partner and I, but there are other things that I could let them in on, like how I'm doing in grief, or other things like my business that I'm working on, because my typical answer would be, oh yeah, I'm doing fine, everything's great, when that's not always the truth.
Right. And it will burden them if I share more. So I'll make the decision for them. They don't have to tell me or feel burdened. I'll just, they're going to be.
I'll make that decision for them, which ends up just backfiring, because that's not how you create friendships. You create friendships by sharing the support. It's a shared thing. It's not something it's not one-sided.
Right.
Yeah.
And my second thought, it was so thoughtful, conscientious of your friend to say, like, okay, I don't want to dump on you. If you're busy the rest of the day, or if this is going to be too much, right? She did pause and just preface, like, this is going to be a lot. Kayla, get ready.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm ready. I'm good. So you were able to make that decision. And yeah, it's like you said, like it'd be helpful to preface that with friends. Also, I think where codependents often feel helpless or it's more difficult is when your friend calls, she starts to dump, and you do have something, right? You actually, you're like, I gotta go. And you, right? I know in my experience, like I've had that call, and then I don't know, even that session with a patient. I remember, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I was working with a little boy, and his caregivers were arguing, and I was literally in the middle of them on a couch. It just kept going and going and going. And I was supposed to meet my husband for dinner. I couldn't get up. I couldn't check my phone. I couldn't say to them, I have to leave. This is going on way too long. I was like crazy late to see him because I couldn't, it would have been nice for them to preface it like, Marissa, this is going to take a while. So your thoughts on, right, it's not either or, but maybe a both and responsibility.
Yeah. And if we really care about our friends, then that means we care about their time and should honor that time by, giving them a heads up or asking like, hey, I have this thing that I really would like to talk about with you. Do you have time now, or when can we talk about this thing?
Yeah. Heads up.
And if your friend, not if they care about you, but if they have the capacity to have that conversation, they're going to make the time for it.
Yeah.
And if they don't, it doesn't mean that they're not a good friend. They're just being honest with you because they trust you, that no, they don't have the capacity right now to talk about that, that issue that might be hard for them.
Yeah.
I think that's a struggle too. In terms of, what does this mean if my friend won't talk about this thing with me? Like, am I a bad friend, or are they a bad friend? But it's not, for me, it's not it's not black and white. These things are not black and white. There's a lot of gray in our friendships. And there's not going to be a checklist of, if they did this thing this one time, they're a bad friend. Or if they couldn't give me time this one time to talk about, this hard topic, that they're a bad friend. So we also need to be respectful of that too.
The gray. Where would you like to go next?
I don't think I have a specific direction. Yeah.
Well, I know we plan to talk about codependency and grief. Shall we head that?
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
Yeah. Okay. I wonder if you can share what grief means to you and how it relates to codependency.
What does grief mean to me, and how it relates to codependency? For me, grief is the journey after losing a loved one, someone who had a lot of meaning to you, and you had a very specific relationship with them. It, in its relation to codependency, I think that a grief journey can be stalled when codependent tendencies come up. For me, after my dad died, I took on this I'll take care of everything role. Because even though he was my dad, he was my mother's husband, the love of her life. And I couldn't imagine like losing my own husband and the pain that I would have then. So I'm like, yes, he's my dad, but that's her husband, the love of her life. They've been together and known each other longer than my existence. Like that is hard. Losing someone, in my mind, I was like, losing someone that you've known basically your entire life is gone, taken from you. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to handle everything. And I try to organize things in certain ways so that my mom would have less to worry about. And then at the same time, I took it upon myself to put my own grief aside. Because if I entered into this grief, I wouldn't have the capacity to do those things. And I use the term, I took it upon myself very intentionally because I did. No one asked me to do these things. I just did them. Mm-hmm. This wasn't necessarily something that was expected of me. And like with my friends, when people would ask me how I was doing, I would tell them I was doing okay, or I was doing as well as I could.
When you really were,
I was really in the moment, I was doing okay because I didn't allow myself to think about it. And it was really easy for me to distance myself from it because my dad would often travel for work. And so it was very easy for me to just pretend like he was traveling. Yeah.
So you would have said, I'm okay because I'm not thinking about it and pretending that my dad's on a work trip.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the codependency part is in the assumption is that my mom needed me more than I needed her as my mom. Or another thought that I would have is I would be too much. I would be putting too much on her for her and my sister. So I also have a younger sister. I'm the oldest in my family. It's just me and my sister, so two of us. I would be putting too much on them because I'm the oldest and I should be the one to take care of all of this. And then this is another cultural thing too, and oldest daughter thing, right? Of being the one to take the responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm reminded too of that, not letting others make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't allow them to make that decision on whether I would be too much or not.
Mm-hmm. Other ways you experienced or have observed others' grief journeys being stalled due to codependency?
Oh yeah. Um, just in, I used to work with a lot of veterans. I worked under a grant that was specifically for veterans and their families. And what came to be a theme is that they never wanted their families to really know what they went through, and not even thinking about security stuff. But there are some stuff, there is some topics that they could talk about with their families if in their experience, from whatever they witnessed, that they were always too scared to bring up, in fear that they would scar their own family members. So they were taking it upon themselves to make that decision for their family, their partners. This was often a partner relationship, of whether or not they could handle, sitting with them in their traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes up often when I'm working with couples, and not specifically just veterans, that they're too scared to really open up about these things with their partners, in fear that they're going to do more damage to their partner than even help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's actually, I don't have like the specific articles, but there is research that shows that your partner is can be a really a big help in processing trauma, because what helps is that support system. When you don't allow your partner in, you're not allowing them to support you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So withholding, or fear of burdening and withholding trauma or grief, you've observed that. And then in your own experience, organizing, putting your grief aside, taking on a heroine role, right? I'll handle everything.
Yeah.
And this underlying sense that my grief, my trauma will burden others, right? Protecting them from the burden. Almost like other traits of codependence and their grief journey.
Other traits. Nothing is popping out at me or screaming at me at this moment. I think also the fear or a belief of what will others think of me if I do let them in. Will they see me differently if they truly know whatever it was I or clients I've worked with in the past have experienced?
I'm assuming differently in a bad way, right? There's not this like, oh, if what will others think of me if I let them in? They'll think I'm this amazing, authentic person. No, it's I'm what?
I'm weak. I don't actually have it all together. I am human.
Needy? I'm needy?
Yeah, needy.
I cut you off there.
Too much to handle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What happens to codependents who, for whatever reason, stall their grieving process?
From my experience of myself and what I've seen in others, it's similar to going through a traumatic experience and trying to push it away to try and forget. So when these codependencies are coming up, when in terms of the grief, when it's coming up, you push it away, or I would push it away, so that I could be that person to support everyone else. But then it would come up whenever I least expected it, or it would come up if I maybe had too much to drink, and I would just, all the words would start spilling out of how I really was feeling to whoever was sitting with me. Yeah. And in that moment, I didn't have control. And when you're dealing with grief, you want to be able to do it. Well, I'm not trying to say there's a perfect way to grieve, but you want the control in terms of who you're talking to. Can they support you? Is this healthy? And I was trying to compare it in terms of like how oftentimes people who've experienced trauma will push it aside and try and forget about it. And then these intrusive symptoms come at you when you least expect it. And this is what happens with the grief. It comes at you when you least expect it and you're not prepared. Versus if you're allowing yourself to work through your grief and process it, you can handle and you're prepared for whenever it hits you. Versus trying to ignore it.
Yeah. The word that comes to mind is contain, right? Sometimes therapy is a description of it as a container, right? So
yeah,
consciously and unconsciously, when I go to therapy, I know that I have about an hour to talk about whatever I'm bringing. And going through grief, going through trauma, it's like, okay, I show up in this space and okay, I have this much time to talk about it. And it's like a flight, right? I get on, we left off, travel somewhere. And the hope is, towards the end of the session, okay, let's put our seatbelt on, prepare for landing. And this soft landing until the next, right time, like container. And it can come out, like you said, other ways, but just more intentional.
Yeah.
So codependence, or codependency, grieving, stalling someone's grieving process. You said it can come up, the grief can come up when they least expect it as a consequence to pushing it away. So I hear like excess, right? So drinking, shopping, eating, just different various ways of coping can be a part of what happens. And then with that, a loss of control. And then this like spilling over, right? Container, there's no containment, this spilling over. And as you said, little control over who you're talking to, whether or not they can support you.
Yeah.
And yeah, just really it unfolding in a manner that you're not prepared for.
Yeah. And whether or not those people that I was around at the time were even safe people to have those conversations with. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what happens for this codependency stalling the grieving process?
Yeah. In the stalling, the grief never gets easier. Over time, with grief, the pain is always there, but it becomes easier to handle. But when you've stalled it, the easy part doesn't happen. The weight of the grief doesn't become more manageable like it would normally.
It never gets easier. Other experiences, your own or with your clients, of codependency stalling the grieving process?
No, not any other things.
How do you help, or how did you help yourself or your clients move forward in the grieving process?
Yeah, for me, I started going to therapy. I started seeing my own therapist, which was very helpful, because it allowed me to finally talk about my own experience without that fear of being judged, because that's what that person was designed to do. That's what that person was trained in. And in that process, learning that if I want my relationships to be real, I have to be able to receive the support too. Which means being more honest when questions are asked.
So I'm hearing therapy, being more honest. Other ways that have helped you or your clients move forward in the grieving process?
In the grieving process, what is helpful, and this, I don't think this is like specifically related to codependency. Oh, no, it is. It is. Never mind. As I'm thinking about it, it's like, no, it is. So when grieving, being someone on the other side initially, so not having lost someone. My dad was the first person to have died that really, really meant something to me. That it hit me very hard versus other, family members, or people I knew just in passing. It didn't really hit me like it did. But one thing from before losing my dad and experiencing other people's griefs, one thing I would think is I wouldn't want to bring up their past loved one, because I didn't want to open up something for them that maybe they didn't want to talk about. But being on the other side now, having lost my dad, I would love it if more people would talk about him. Like, it's not a hard thing for me to hear stories about my dad, because it keeps him alive with those stories. And from talking to other people who have lost people that they really cared about and loved so deeply, they do want to talk about it more, but often people are afraid to bring them up.
Right.
And when they do, it's often met with an apology at the end, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," or I hope it's okay, but your dad was an awesome person." Or you're like, "No, absolutely okay. Talk about my dad more." So talking about the loved ones people have lost, is definitely something that should happen more.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person didn't want that to happen, trust that they would tell you, "Hey, I don't want to talk about that right now."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Again,
Or,
I'm
"I'm not ready
reminded
to
of,
talk about that."
yeah, this codependency is not letting others make decisions for themselves. So I'll make the decision. Kayla cannot handle me bringing up what we did with her dad last spring break. So I won't mention it, even though it was, oh my gosh, like that was so funny when whatever he did. But I, right in my codependency, wanting to, give and make decisions for you, I won't mention that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Therapy, being honest, talking about the lost loved one, letting other people mention or set a boundary if they're not ready, don't want to talk about it, but not making a decision for them. Other ways you've seen your clients move forward in their grieving process.
If your partner is supportive and you trust them, talk to them about what's going on for you. That's what they're there for. Using that support of your partner to help you through the grief, even if it was someone that they also had, a strong relationship with. Because, if anything, your partner is one of the closest people to you who you're sharing this grief experience with.
Right.
Yeah.
Where are you at in your grieving process? How has it changed or moved forward?
It's moved forward and changed enough where I'm in a place to help others through their own grieving process. Earlier in the grief, I would not have been able to help people through their own grieving process, because it would just bring up stuff for me that I hadn't worked on or experienced yet. Or I mean, not necessarily experienced, but maybe wouldn't have been as helpful, because I would just be a mess myself. And that's not helpful in therapy, to have a therapist who's bawling next to you and can't help you, through any kind of coping mechanisms or techniques during that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So going back to, we talked about what happens, right? Loss of control, pushing it away, falling apart when other people mention their grief.
Yeah.
Another consequence. So you're able to help others. Any other observations or things you've noticed and how you've moved forward from codependency stalling your grieving process?
I'm more willing to, be open about it with my family than I was initially. Yeah.
Right.
That's not to say that I 100% tell them everything,
No?
but
No.
but that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me, and it's okay. It's okay to do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a process. Yeah. I think, again, like going back to, you talked about like recognizing the gray in friendship. I think codependents, we tend to like live and experience the world in extremes. And so then also it's like, okay, I'm withholding from my family and being a little codependent. Now I need to share everything and tell them everything. And it's like, like, we have to just kind of working our way to some middle ground, right? Where it's opening up with family, opening up with partner, opening up with a therapist, friends who've lost loved ones. Yeah, just the gray in between those two black and white extremes.
Yeah. Yeah, because definitely there are some things that just wouldn't be helpful to share, so I would never intentionally, be hurtful to anyone, but sometimes, hurtful thoughts come up, but that's just because we're human. And if we're not sharing those, we're not being a bad person, we're not lying, but we're not being, a codependent, right? Just some things aren't helpful sharing.
Right. Context. Context. Final thoughts. Codependency and the grieving process moving forward.
Grief looks different for everybody. No, even if you lost your loved one the same way someone else lost their loved one, there's literally no comparing your grief to others.
No comparing.
Yeah.
Well, Kayla, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to come on.
If people want to work with you, hear more about you, what are you offering currently?
Yeah, so I'm licensed in Texas. So if anyone listening is from Texas and want to work with me, they can send me an email at kayla@kaylanettleton.com, which is going to be on the title, right? So they can go back and look at the title of the episode to get my name. And then for anyone else outside of Texas, I have an Instagram. It's at Kayla Nettleton _LCSW. I'm in the process of rebuilding my website. So when that actually goes live, I'll be posting it there on Instagram, letting people know. And then for those that are outside of Texas, I'm starting a mom's education and support group in April. So I myself am a mom of 3 littles, 7 and under. 7, 3, and 1 are the ages of my kiddos. And so this education and support group really came, I started, I guess, designing and thinking about it when my oldest son was born, because I felt really lonely during that time. And I was only 23 when I had him. So I was really young. I felt alone, and I never wanted other moms to feel that way, the way that I did. So this group is a really special project for me. So it's going to be a group, and then at the end, it will also be an extended community as well.
Awesome. All right. So we'll put links to that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for more information on that, you can send me an email or at kayla@kaylanettleton.com. Or you can send me a DM on Instagram.
Okay. We'll put links to your email, Instagram, and website under construction in the show notes. And again, thank you for being here. Listener, thank you for being here, and we will see you all next week. Take care. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please